Welcome to The Paradox with your attending, Dr. Eric Larson. He is a practicing anesthesiologist and clinical assistant professor at Michigan State University College of Human Medicine. Listen in as he takes you behind the scenes of what practicing medicine in today's ever-changing world is like with another doctor. The Paradox is a fun and accidentally informative show for physicians, patients, or anyone who has ever found themselves in a waiting room.
Hey guys, it's Eric here. I'm here with John Bush. John is the owner of Live Free Academy. He's been involved in the cryptocurrency space since 2013. He's played a major role in spreading the early adoption of Bitcoin through multiple promotional family road trips, which you may or may not have seen earlier, where he was trying to live off just Bitcoin alone back when people thought Bitcoin wasn't a real thing. And he set up meetups and got businesses to set up cryptocurrency accepting and just educating public along the way. He hosted the Sovereign BTC podcast from 2014 to 16 on Let's Talk Bitcoin Network, interviewing a lot of big names in Bitcoin: Vitalik Buterin, Roger Ver, Eric Voorhees, Charlie Shrem, and more. He's spoken at all sorts of different conferences. He's had his work places like Yahoo Travel, CoinDesk, Cointelegraph, Bitcoin Magazine, Russia Today. And he's going to join us today to talk about, this is part 1 of 2, and we're going to talk about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general, and then how it sort of should affect you in your daily life and also your business. So John, thanks so much for joining The Paradox.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
Well, it's a real thrill. I first became known to you, I guess, is when I joined your class. And I would say it was the demystifying cryptocurrency, which I've always was interested in getting involved in cryptocurrency, but didn't really know how and had no idea. And I think probably lots of people are in that boat. And I want to say, first of all, it was a great program. I learned a ton. And I got far more out of that than I put in, as far as the amount of value I should say it was a lot, it far exceeded what was advertised, which is unusual.
Cool. Yeah. I like to over deliver.
You definitely over delivered. It took me probably 2 months to go through all the content.
Okay.
So it's appreciated. But why don't we talk about the basics of cryptocurrency? This actually does have to do with medicine. I think, in medicine, I've talked a lot about the third-party payment system and how it's just kind of screwy. It's not a good interaction between the customer, the patient, and the provider. And so I think this is a good example with cryptocurrency and sort of how it can sort of rewire the economy and the way things work. So could you briefly describe, I guess, what a blockchain is and what cryptocurrencies are?
Sure. It's a challenge to go brief, but
yeah, right.
We'll do our best. So cryptocurrency first got started in 2008, 2009 with the invention of Bitcoin. That was Satoshi Nakamoto, the anonymous creator of Bitcoin. And essentially what it is the ability to exchange information or exchange money or value without having to go through a third party or an intermediary. And this was a big deal, a big innovation, because in the past, in order to send money from one party to another, unless you were physically handing off gold or bartering, even with dollars, even handing off dollars, you still have to trust an institution to maintain its value, I suppose. But this was the first example of a decentralized currency that can be transferred anywhere globally. And it was a really big deal. And there's so many implications now. And so that's what cryptocurrency is. It's a currency that uses cryptography. It's generally decentralized, meaning there's no central authority that controls it. And then a blockchain, the way that most cryptocurrencies work is the transactions that take place on the network are stored in blocks. These are just chunks of information. And these blocks are distributed across a whole bunch of computer servers all across the world. So there's no central server to shut down. And there's a chain of blocks that are connected to one another digitally. And these blockchains contain the information as far as who sent what, when, and where. And the blockchain is the underlying technology of cryptocurrency. And it gets really intricate, but it's because of this decentralized, distributed public ledger where you keep track of who has what, who sent what to whom. That's what enables cryptocurrency to work without having to trust a third party.
Right. And so my understanding is you basically have like you said, decentralized. You basically have a bunch of people who are verifying the same work, and they all have to come to the same conclusions to verify that that dollar that you sent me is actually my dollar, and that you had it. It was actually yours to send to me. Is that sort of basics of the block?
Yeah. As soon as cryptocurrency is created, it goes to someone's wallet, right? And this is all recorded in the blockchain. And then when people send that cryptocurrency to another address from their wallet, that's recorded in the blockchain. And you can't go back in time and change the information on the blockchain. It's known as being immutable. So because you can't change it, there's no one central party that can change it, because like you said, that information is spread out on a bunch of different computers and servers all over the world. This is what gives cryptocurrency its security. And it's through that decentralized nature that this happens.
So the threat, I guess, if someone, when it's hard to think about these things. I mean, there are a lot of things in life we don't bother knowing how they work. Like I get into my car and just drive it away. I don't have to know exactly the workings of the car, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think to get into something, especially when you're giving your money, people get very concerned about suddenly become centralized, or someone they can gather a lot of computers together, let's say, and nodes, and start spreading lies like that. I have $1 million of Bitcoin or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Is it just because there's no way really for any one party to have enough, because there's just too many people on this network, that sort of risk is really not viable?
Yeah. So throughout history, most institutions, especially most institutions in power or that have influence today, there's centralization. So that's either
Right.
a government, a corporation, a board of directors, somebody that you have to trust. And so because the network is so distributed, you don't have to trust one party. In order to game the system or manipulate the information on this blockchain, you would have to amass a substantial amount of computing power. The different cryptocurrencies have different consensus mechanisms, which is how the participants in the network come to agreements about what a valid transaction is, what valid information is. And so Bitcoin uses what's called proof of work. So in order to solve these, in order to verify the transactions that are taking place on the network, the computers that do that have to put up a whole lot of computing power. They all compete to solve this puzzle. And whatever computer or group of computers solves the puzzle first, they then earn the privilege of verifying the transactions and then adding the next block to the blockchain. So there's a whole lot of computing power out there behind this network. And in order to game the system, you would have to amass 50% or more of the computing power, which is next near impossible, especially because the chips that are used on these computers that verify the transactions are very difficult to come by. And there's manufacturers that are pumping them out. It's almost impossible for someone to start, corner the market, get all these chips, and then try to game the system. So I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's highly unlikely. And it's definitely more likely that a bank would become corrupt, or a politician, or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, we know there are no corrupt politicians or banks or
definitely
governments,
not.
right? So that's no way that could happen.
Because we have a democracy.
Right. Exactly. When this first was described back in 2008 or 9, when I first read about it, it was definitely an interesting idea, because it's at least with Bitcoin, we'll just focus on Bitcoin initially, because there's, thousands of other alternatives to Bitcoin. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But when it came to Bitcoin, it was a deflationary currency, right? I mean, it was, most of our currency today is inflationary, which means, they can keep printing more and more of it, and there's no limit to how much can be printed. And Bitcoin sort of moves the opposite way. As time goes on, there's less and less of it available, at least, or I should say less and less created, right? So the inflationary rate is lower. And then that doesn't even take into account the people who've lost them in, outhouses or wherever they might lose their Bitcoins.
Voting accident.
Yeah, voting accident, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
So how it's different.
That's one of the great features of Bitcoin, in addition to the decentralized nature, is the fact that it's deflationary, or at least the money supply can't be manipulated by crooks, bureaucrats, politicians. So of course, with the US dollar and fiat currencies, there's central banks, and they manipulate the monetary supply all the time. There's still a lot of people that aren't aware what inflation really is an expansion in the money supply. And then the more money you have, the less that it's worth. It's classic supply and demand. There's a huge supply, so the value goes down. So with Bitcoin, there's a fixed rate of inflation. And every 4 years, the number of Bitcoin that are created with every block, that's how Bitcoin come into existence. Whoever solves that block is rewarded with Bitcoin. That's how they're mined or minted, essentially. So every 4 years, the number of Bitcoin created, every block, approximately 10 minutes, gets halved, cut in half. So there's a fixed inflation supply, and it's constantly getting slower and slower, the amount of Bitcoin, less and less the amount of Bitcoin that are being generated. And this helps with monetary theory and folks that are using Bitcoin because there's an expected rate of inflation. It's not the case that if there's a big emergency or if a different political party takes over, then all of a sudden they're going to start pumping out trillions of dollars, which we see happening right now. And so the effect of that is, rather than being inflationary, where they're creating more and more units and the value of them are going down, because there's a scarce supply of these units and a lot of people want them, it's in high demand, there's a tendency for the price to go up, which is exactly what's happened historically with the price of Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I would say even the only comparison I guess you'd have is to precious metals like gold, which was the previous standard before we moved off the gold standard most of the world. But even there, although you have an expected inflation, mining rate of 1.5% or something, you could certainly find big giant gold reserves or something, some new discoveries, right? And so, like you said, it's probably less of a certainty as far as what the inflationary rate is for something like that, whereas this is fixed.
Yeah, nobody knows how much gold is out there, or there could be like a meteor that comes and strikes down, a big gold
right,
meteor.
Yeah.
I hope it lands in my backyard, but yeah, it's definitely finite and it can be known, and it's totally open source too. So like JP Morgan and the Federal Reserve, remember Ron Paul tried to audit the Fed and that really got nowhere. Anybody can view the Bitcoin source code, which is basically the law governing Bitcoin.
Right. And so that's the difference, right? So you have all these blocks, and you know every single Bitcoin from the very first to the most recent, right, is all stored in, everyone has it in their, for lack of a better word, in their computer, right? I mean, or at least they have a record of these transactions, and they have all those transactions. So is it possible to find the first Bitcoin and have traced to today? I mean, do we know where that first one is?
Yeah, so it's a benefit, and it's also a downside because it's so transparent, right? So that gives some inherent security to the network because people can double check and make sure no one's pulling any funny business, but it also is a problem for privacy. Now with Bitcoin, as long as you play your cards right, you don't have to have your identity tied to the address. An address is kind of like the account number that you send and receive cryptocurrency with.
Right.
But if your identity is tied to one of those addresses, then the entire history of the cryptocurrency that's been sent to that address or sent from that address can be known.
Okay. And I think the terminology is really tricky with cryptocurrencies, and because I think we use words that we use today for physical assets, like a wallet, for instance. Well, I know wallet I put in my pocket, but obviously I can't have a wallet for Bitcoin because it's a digital. It doesn't, I mean, there's no like mass to it, right? You can't put in your pocket. The things I think that are intimidating, at least initially to me, were, not really understanding how it works. And then also just the terminology, like how do you find it? How do you get it? What are wallets? Why, when people say, oh, I have a wallet for this, a wallet for that. I'm like, why do you need 27 wallets for your crypto, right? It's like, you think you just need one, because I only have one wallet for my cash. So can you kind of explain sort of how that is to someone, to newbies, so they just maybe aren't quite so intimidated by the prospect?
Sure. Okay, so when people say a cryptocurrency wallet, they're referring to a computer program, a piece of software that allows users to interact with the cryptocurrency's blockchain. Essentially, it's a piece of software that allows you to send and receive cryptocurrency. More specifically, the wallet will create these public addresses, which essentially are like account numbers, like I was saying earlier. So if I wanted to send cryptocurrency to you, you would get me your public address by messaging it in a chat, emailing it to me, or showing a QR code. I guess after COVID, a lot of people know what QR codes now because you scan them at the restaurant for the menu, which I much prefer a paper menu myself. But
me too. Yeah.
So that's what a public address is. And then one step further, in order to gain access to the cryptocurrency that's been sent to a public address, you have to have what's called a private key. It's this private key that kind of unlocks access to the cryptocurrency and that public address. Whenever you set up a wallet, a piece of software that allows you to send and receive cryptocurrency, it's that wallet software that creates a bunch of private keys and public address combinations. Now, this is important. And again, you don't really have to know all these intricate details to be able to take advantage of the benefits of cryptocurrency. But it is really important because, as we talked about earlier, one of the big benefits of cryptocurrency is that you don't have to trust a third party. There's no need for an intermediary. You can have total control over your money. Well, there are some wallets and some exchanges and some businesses that help people to get cryptocurrency where they actually have access to that private key, the key that allows you to send cryptocurrency if you've received it to your address. So in our course that we did, the Demystifying Crypto workshop, we really encourage people to hold cryptocurrency in what's called a non-custodial wallet. So that's a cryptocurrency wallet, again, a piece of software that you can send and receive crypto with, that only you have access to those private keys. So for folks, it's easy. Using Coinbase is a great tool to purchase cryptocurrency with fiat currency, for example, but they have access to those private keys. So you don't truly own or control that money because you don't even have access to the private key at the end of the day. So a lot of people will buy it with a exchange wallet or a custodial wallet, and they'll send it to a non-custodial wallet, which is a great thing to do if you're going to be holding your money. And there's multiple different wallets. There's different kinds of wallets. There's wallets on your smartphone. You can have a wallet on your desktop. You can have a paper wallet. And all it is that public address and the corresponding private key, right? But the important thing is, if you're going to hold crypto, especially a substantial amount of crypto, that you hold it in a wallet where no one else has access to those private keys except for you.
Right. And I think that, the way I think about it, maybe this is not accurate, but I always think of it like your public address is sort of like a PO box, and that everyone knows where to send mail to you. And then I'm the only one who has the key to get in, and that's the private key, right? To get into it. And I've got to make sure that I have my key somewhere, or copy the key somewhere else in case I were to lose my key or forget my passwords or whatever like that. And so some wallets, like I have a wallet, which you recommend, the Exodus wallet, which is, you can have multiple cryptocurrencies, but it's basically like a bunch of wallets inside one wallet, right? It's like, because is that sort of, because you have 10 different, it's all different addresses that come in, but you have a separate address for each specific currency you have, or, cryptocurrency you have. And then I don't know, I guess because the wallet thing threw me off, but now it makes much more sense. And now and the tricky thing I think is with the non-custodial is that if you lose it or lose your key, it's gone, whatever money you have invested in it, right? And so that's always that's the risk, of course, with, you hear these stories, people, try and enter things in and then their Bitcoin's lost forever, or they, something happens.
Yeah. Yeah. So with great freedom, being able to control your money, comes great responsibility. So
right.
It's always really important that you back up your private keys, or your seed phrase is another way that cryptocurrency wallets create this seed. And so you can have a wallet that only deals with Bitcoin, for example, or Bitcoin Cash or Ethereum. It only deals with one type of cryptocurrency. Like you said earlier, there's thousands of different cryptocurrencies. There's over 6,600 of them. There's constantly new ones being added, but
yeah,
there's something that's really handy called a multi-wallet. And that's one cryptocurrency software program that allows you to interact with multiple different cryptocurrencies. That's called a multi-wallet. But at the end of the day, it starts with one master private key, this one random long string of numbers and letters. And it's that master private key that creates all of the sub private keys and sub public addresses. So that one master private key is where the rubber meets the road. And they're all the new addresses, even if it's for a different cryptocurrency, they're all tied to that one master private key.
Yeah, it is a bit intimidating. Like, although I would say once you kind of start, you realize, as long as you recognize what you're doing, and it's not too hard to figure out, I guess. I mean,
yeah,
you can use a
experience
smartphone.
is the greatest teacher.
Yeah,
it's a challenge. And even as I'm talking, so I did the workshop, the Demystifying Crypto workshop, and ended up delivering over 17 hours worth of content. And my goal in business is to over deliver and just blow people away with value. But in doing so, producing 17 hours of content, some people were like, whoa, this is too much, man. Now I'm overwhelmed and there's too much information for me to even digest at all. So ever since then, I've always tried to be real conscious. Like even as I'm speaking with you, I'm like thinking in my head, like, is this like way too complicated? Master private key and all this stuff. So I'm constantly trying to refine things to make it as simple as possible because it is really complex at the end of the day. Like you said, a lot of people don't even know how a credit card works, or nobody knows how the central banks really generate all the money. They just do a bunch of behind the scenes kind of stuff. So I'm always trying to make it as simple as possible. We do have a workshop coming up where I'm going to make it even more simple, and it's going to be slowed down and broken down to the most basic core elements. But like you said, the best way to learn is to experiment with it. And you can download a wallet for free. There's a lot of cryptocurrencies you can send and receive to one another. They cost little to nothing at all to send. So you download the wallet, you have a friend, you get them to send you $5 worth of Bitcoin Cash, for example. Now you have your first cryptocurrency in your wallet, then you can send back 25 cents to them. And then you just kind of get a feel for what it's like to use this new form of money.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely was helpful watching your class because how you have to be very careful when you copy addresses, because the addresses are not like john@yahoo.com. It's like 80, I don't know, it's 80 characters long or something, numbers and letters. And and so you have to copy the whole thing, and you basically have to copy and paste, which is not impossible to do, but you just have to be very careful, I suppose, when you're sending this stuff. Otherwise it gets lost wherever, right? I mean, that's the real threat to it. And I just want to your point about being careful with terminology. We've used the word, thrown around the word fiat a couple of times, and just so people know what fiat is just a regular, it's just what we use as a dollar. So it doesn't have any actual physical backing to it, right? I think that's probably the best way to describe fiat. Most currencies like euros and, yen and all those things are all fiat currency. So when you're buying cryptocurrencies with fiat, that's sort of what we're talking about. So
yeah, like United States dollar or euro or yuan. And there's another element to the definition of being forced to use the currencies by a government also.
Sure.
But then another element is there's nothing backing it up. It's not sound money. It's basically funny money.
Right. Yeah. And, when we talk about blockchain, I haven't talked about this in over 100 episodes. So when I first started the show, and I recommend people can go back to listen to episodes 14 and 18, I talked to Mr. Hodges from Citizen Health, and then I talked to Dr. Houston from HPEC, where they wanted to incorporate blockchain technology into medicine. Because one thing is for credentialing, which you're probably not even aware, we have credentials that we have, medical degree, where we've worked in hospitals, what sort of litigation we've had pending against us, where a DA license, and there's a number of, your national provider ID number. There's for CMS, for the Medicare services, you have your own ID. And so if you don't normally control those as a physician, you have to give it to credentialing in the hospital, and they say, okay, you can work here, you can't work here. But there are mistakes that are sometimes made, and sometimes things are put on that ledger, that your permanent record, if we're back in elementary school, right, that are errors, or that someone uses your number, like someone uses their social security number, for instance, it'd be the same thing. And so there are thoughts of using blockchain technology, and that way you control it now as a physician, as opposed to having, the hospital control it. You have to ask permission to get to, move to another hospital. It could be some sort of dispute. And so, there are a lot of applications for blockchains that are not necessarily cryptocurrencies. So I think cryptocurrencies brought the technology into sort of the forefront, but I think more people are finding, reasons to use blockchains. And I feel like when I look at a lot of these cryptocurrencies, we've talked about Bitcoin. There are all kinds of different ones. And you mentioned the proof of work. Can you explain proof of stake? Because I think that has a lot more relation to when it comes to other use for blockchains for information contracts and things like that.
Sure. So you bring up a good point, and that's that currency was just the first application of blockchain technology. And having this decentralized, trustless public ledger that's immutable, meaning you can't go back and change it, that really creates a lot of opportunities. And having a digital identity is one of them. Now, I'm an anti-authoritarian guy, and I'm very keen on privacy rights. And I'm very well aware that there are some not good actors that are trying to use blockchain and just use technology in general to track, trace, surveil anything that they can. They're like control freaks. So there are efforts to create like a global digital identity, for example. But like you said, with cryptocurrency, with blockchain specifically, you can create these identities that you have control over that aren't issued or can't be taken away, for example. Like it can't be revoked by some central party, right? And if there's a bunch of doctors or medical professionals or an entire industry that agrees on certain standards, and those standards are coded in a blockchain, and it really helps to overcome some of that corruption or some of those errors that may take place. So there's different ways to prove the validity of transactions and information that takes place on a blockchain. And if you notice earlier, I said, I always like to bring up that it's a way to transfer information because there are multiple different applications. And in the case of a cryptocurrency, money, what's being transferred, the information being transferred is who has what little unit or token or bit of money, sure, right? But you can transfer all sorts of different information as well, like you pointed out with the IDs. So in order to confirm what information is being transferred, in order to confirm if it's valid or not, there's what's called consensus mechanisms. And different consensus mechanisms exist for different cryptocurrencies. One of them is proof of work. That was the first one for Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And essentially, whoever there's all this computing power, and that's what you're proving. You're proving that you do this work in the form of solving a digital puzzle. And so people are competing, expending mass amounts of computing power to see who could solve this really complex puzzle. Whoever solves the complex puzzle first, they then go through the history of the transactions that take place, and they cross-reference the current set of transactions that just took place in the previous 10 minutes. They cross-reference all of those with the transactions in the previous block, with the transactions in the previous block, and the previous block to make sure each one was achieved legitimately, right? So that's proof of work. You got to work with computers, and it takes a lot of computing power. Elon Musk recently was critical of this, causing the price of Bitcoin to tank quite a bit. Turns out that it's actually more sustainable than a lot of people would have you think. And a significant number of these mining computers use green energy. So that's proof of work, but something that's becoming more popular because it kind of levels the playing fields in some ways, and it is more environmentally friendly, is what's called proof of stake. And so instead of running computers and competing, solving these problems, you simply take your cryptocurrency and you stake that cryptocurrency. You kind of lock it in. And the way that they choose who gets to solve the next block is whoever has the most cryptocurrency staked, they have the greatest chance of being selected to solve that next block by going through the history of the transactions. So that's what's known as proof of stake. It just works a little bit differently. It's less energy intensive. It still kind of tilts the playing field to those folks that are holding more of the cryptocurrency. But for people that are wanting to invest in cryptocurrency, proof of stake is a great investment opportunity because let's say you invest $1,000 or $10,000 worth of a given cryptocurrency. Some of them, when it comes to the rewards that you get, if you're just holding that cryptocurrency, are 2.5%, 5%, upwards of 8.5%. So it's a great way. You just get a wallet like Exodus, you mentioned before. You set your cryptocurrency aside. I like Cardano. It's a really popular cryptocurrency. We can talk about some of the different ones in a little bit. And then you basically just lock it in. You kind of set it and forget it. And then you're earning 5% APY, and that all compounds. So it's just a really simple way. And it's all decentralized too. It's not a bank that's paying you interest. You're not getting interest from other people's deposits. It's just created. That's how the money is generated. That's how the new money is created.
Right. And I think it's important to point out for those listening to think, well, that's amazing, but that you are getting payback in whatever the currency is, right? So if you're doing Cardano, you're getting paid at 5% Cardano creation. If Cardano drops 50%, then you've gained Cardano, but it's worth, you still might be worse off. Obviously, if it gets more expensive or it gets worth more, then you've made 5% plus whatever the gains are in the currency. So it's like any other sort of currency, I guess, in that sense. And it all depends on the benchmark you're using against, the dollar in this case.
Yep. That's why you got to pick a good one, because there's some that are like 8.5%. And you're like, wow, that sounds great. But maybe they're not the most reliable ones. They go up and down.
And I think
one thing go up and down, to be honest. Sorry.
Well,
they all go up and down crazy style.
And I think that's probably partly due to the market share is pretty small, right? I mean, you have access from lots of people all over the world who can get these things. And I mean, the amount of people actually trading it and the amount of money is pretty small compared to other things. Like, gold has been around for thousands of years, right? So it's had a pretty stable market by this point. Cryptocurrency is brand new. I mean, the evolution, right? It's 10 years old, maybe, if that.
Yeah. And gold's been around for centuries, but
yeah,
at the end of the day, cryptocurrency is now, I don't know what it is more recently, but it's over $1 trillion market cap, and gold is like 10 trillion. So it's getting up there. I just heard this guy, Brian Rose. I don't know if your viewers are familiar with London Real. Great guy. He's all into business and finance, and he's quite the rebel as well. But he pointed out that he thinks part of the volatility with cryptocurrencies because there's so many young people that have never invested and they let their emotions get involved. And there's a lot of, just crazy action. And everyone, when the price goes up, everyone has fear of missing out, also known as FOMO. So they're all buying. There's also some manipulation as well, probably from bad actors, but also just from wealthy, powerful financier types that can sway markets. They're called whales. It's definitely something to be concerned about. You never want to invest more than you're willing to lose because there is somewhat risk. But early on, that was more of the story being told, more of the narrative. But now things are kind of shifting to the point where it's probably more risky to only have dollar-based assets, because even though cryptocurrency goes up and down, it's very volatile. It's always going up in value, even though there's big dips. It's consistently going up. Whereas we know for sure now that the United States dollar's value is consistently going down.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's no question about that. You look at what the purchasing power of a dollar 100 years ago was, 90, it's lost 98% of its value or 99%. It's some crazy amount, right? Yeah. And I think it's important, I guess, to think about the fact that it is an investment, but we're probably getting to the point where it's maybe not an investment as much, right? I mean, I think now that you're starting to see institutional investors, and those are like JP Morgan and large investment houses, or versus retail investors like you and me buying stuff, that the likelihood that it's going to persist and continue on is a lot higher, right? I mean, when it's just you and me investing, there's not that much money in it. You and I don't have that lot, even if, but when you start throwing $1 billion in at a time, like these large hedge funds or whatever, you can definitely see how the likelihood of it being here 20 years from now is a lot higher than it was maybe even 5 years ago. I mean, I think you feel pretty confident that there's going to be cryptocurrencies here going forward. It's hard to imagine them going away.
It's definitely becoming more legitimate in the eyes of not only the public, the retail investors, but also mainstream, I call them legacy financial institutions. And these legacy financial institutions are also well aware, probably more aware than most people, about the inflation that's taking place. And a lot of these institutions and individuals that invest their money in these institutions have a lot to lose from inflation. And unless you're like right there receiving the money when it's created from the Fed, like you're a really big insider, you appreciate the inflation because you get the money before it loses its value in the market. It's harmful for a lot of people. Obviously, the middle class seems to get squeezed the most, right? But for folks that have amassed significant amount of wealth, there's definitely a really good use case for cryptocurrency. Again, like you talked about earlier, the deflationary nature and the capped finite. So I think it's here to stay. And I always point out also that, because everyone's like, they're going to ban cryptocurrency. Well, a lot of the same people that line the pockets of politicians are now involved in cryptocurrency too. And Wall Street's involved, and all these hedge funds and banks. And so they have mass influence on the politicians. So kind of creates this check and balance. But yeah, I definitely think it's here to stay. There's people that have been saying it's going to be gone, it's going to be outlawed, it's not going to stand the test of time. And then you're like, well, it's been around for 12 years now. So are you going to keep saying that when it's here for 22 years or 30 years?
Right.
Like what's the limit for you to kind of let go of that and recognize that it's here to stay?
Finally, there are central governments who are talking about digital currencies. And so I imagine, that's like, I think China's already, have they started, or they're going to make a digital yuan? And what do you think the role is going to be for these currencies? I mean, do you think that everyone's going to pretty much get away from cash and then they're just going to be all digital? And they'll still, I mean, I can't imagine cryptocurrencies as we sort of see them in the decentralized nature are going to go away. But do you think the decentralized currencies are going to be, what do you think? I guess, what do you think the role is going to be for them in the coming 5 to 10 years?
Well, So I'm an activist and a libertarian, and when that was why I was first attracted to Bitcoin, because I thought that it would totally upend the central banks and the Federal Reserve,
Sure.
and gave people freedom and privacy and control of their own money. But now looking back, it's like, wow, these central banks and these big power players were really quite cunning. And so they had this technology that's a threat to their very existence. And they didn't go out, they didn't just give up and walk away. They're like, well, maybe we can leverage this technology ourselves. Big difference, of course, is that Bitcoin and other popular cryptocurrencies are decentralized. Well, these central banks are wanting to leverage blockchain technology and the ledger and the ability to have this digital money that's trackable and traceable. And they're going to create it in a centralized way. So really, I think what it is it's central banks coming into the 21st century, but it's also, there's an element of control. So of course, China, many people are aware that the Chinese Communist Party has this social credit score system. Right. And whenever you have a central bank digital currency, eventually it'll probably be the only game in town as far as the status quo, mainstream money, right? And one thing that Brian Rose pointed out, no, it was actually Robert Kiyosaki. He's quite the rebel himself as well, and he's really into cryptocurrency, which I think is cool. He's the guy that wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad, if folks aren't familiar. He was talking about when you have the central bank digital currencies, essentially it's going to do away with the whole need to have a bank in the first place, because you'll have this one house that issues everything. And there can be financial instruments, like with decentralized finance, you can do cryptocurrency finances through a centralized source, the central bank digital currency. So I don't like it at all. And my hope is that there's enough free people out there that are like, well, you guys have your central bank, your Fed coin or your digital yuan or whatever. Obviously, this is going to be much harder to do in China, because I think freedom the little flame of hope for freedom may have gone out in China long ago, but it's definitely alive here in the United States of America. So I'm hoping that people will just use better money, use money that's not manipulated, use money that doesn't enable them to be controlled, because the implication with the central bank digital currency is that you can track and trace exactly how things are getting spent. And if you attach that with some sort of social credit score system, like apparently Great Britain is doing research on giving incentives for people making healthy choices based on what they purchase at the grocery store. So that would be a challenge. You could figure it out with credit cards, but it's all this, it's kind of decentralized, all the different networks and banks and Visa and MasterCard. But if you have everyone gets issued these central bank digital currencies, it would very much be easy to see where those currencies end up. And then if it's tied through with the barcode or whatever it is you purchased at the grocery store, they can easily just turn off your ability to do that. It's very much like the mark of the beast that was written about in the book of Revelation. So I'm definitely concerned about it, but I feel optimistic that cryptocurrency and this uncontrollable ability for people to do business with one another, the cat's out of the bag, and I don't think we're going to be able to put it back. They're going to be able to put it back. I don't want to put it back.
I think you're probably, I think you're right. I mean, I think, if the less utility that a monetary system has, and this, if it were limited in ways you could use it, I think it just would be, it would not be seen as valuable by most people, right? So if you have a currency that can get turned off and on, you can see that it's inflationary, it's worth less. Only certain places you can use it. I think people would just value it less, and they'd even go to greater lengths to try and get out to something that they would trust more, which in this case would be probably like a Bitcoin, like, currency or product. So that's I guess always the push and pull of any new technology, any new sort of thing that happens. There's, you can use things for good or bad, right? TNT is great unless you throw it at someone's head, but when you're mining with it, it's great, right? I mean, it's sure. Like any sort of new science. So for people who just want to get involved, I know you've got a course coming up, and this is not like an advertisement for, I wanted to have you on to talk about Bitcoin, but can you talk to people about what you're offering coming up? And then I think what we'll do is we'll have a link to it, just make it easy for people to paradox.com/crypto. Why don't you describe briefly what your classes that you're having coming up in a couple of weeks?
Yeah, so on August 14th and 15th, I'm going to be doing a 2-day interactive virtual workshop. It's called Cryptocurrency for Beginners. So for folks that participate, they are going to spend approximately 5 hours each day with me here in the studio. This is a digital whiteboard. I'm super excited about this new little piece of technology. I need to work on my handwriting, I should say, but
yeah,
essentially
well, mine's better. Trust me.
Oh, is it doctor's handwriting? I guess
it was bad. I was destined to be a doctor, pretty much. Yeah.
So they are going to learn what cryptocurrency is, why it's so valuable, why it's so innovative and disruptive, why it's here to stay. And then specifically, we're going to teach people how to purchase cryptocurrency with dollars or other fiat currencies, how to store that cryptocurrency safely and securely, how to transact in cryptocurrency. We're going to teach people about some of the different alternative cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin's just the first to market, but there's many others. There's some that may actually become more valuable than Bitcoin someday. And then we're going to teach people about private cryptocurrencies and how to send and receive cryptocurrency privately. And then we're going to get a little bit into some of the bigger things that are on the horizon, like decentralized finance, which essentially is giving people access to financial instruments and financial vehicles like loans, savings, decentralized exchanges, putting money up and getting interest back, putting money as liquidity in a decentralized exchange where people can trade with one another and earning a whole lot of interest on that. So we're really going to break down a lot of that stuff. We're going to keep it really, really basic and simple, more simple than how we've been communicating here on this podcast for sure. And we're just going to take people step by step, hold their hands. And again, that's the 14th and 15th. And if you can't make those dates, you can purchase a ticket and you'll have 30 days access to the replay after we post it, or you can purchase a digital download and have access to the content for a lifetime.
Yeah. And that's what I did with your first show because frankly, I knew I couldn't get through it in the days that you had it. And then also, you, like I said, you over-delivered. There's far more content than I anticipated. So it took a while to kind of get through all that stuff. Really good stuff. Good, great question and answer. And I highly recommend it for anyone who wants to get involved in cryptocurrency. So that you can find that at theparadox.com/crypto. You can also check out John's website at livefree.academy. And that's where you sort of have your consulting business, I guess you'd say, or at least educational information and access to all the things you do when it comes to cryptocurrency. John, thanks so much. I'm going to have you on again. We're going to go a little bit deeper into cryptocurrencies. And I appreciate that. We're going to talk about how you can really work with it with your business and things like that. And the DeFi, I think, is really interesting too. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to The Paradox. If you like what the doc is doing, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or Stitcher. And share the show with your friends. Become a supporting listener to get access to special bonuses at patreon.com/theparadox. Show notes can be found at theparadox.com.